So I've been practicing his name all morning, and it's a pleasure to bring up Quan Heng Lim. So I hope I pronounced that right. We more affectionately know him as Q. So Q is the country manager for Southeast Asia, and he's a real driving force behind what we're doing there and how we're expanding out there. So working with Q, I mean, it's an absolute pleasure, right? His level of insight, or what knowledge he has in terms of what organizations need to adopt for technology to stay competitive and what the cybersecurity risk entails when they make those adoptions, is second to none. And I think his talk today is going to shed a little bit more light on that. So he's going to be talking about demystifying an ISMS and the security models that go along with it. So Q, if you can give me a sec, I'm just going to sell my shares of Zoom and then throw up your PowerPoint.
Thank you. Thanks, John, for the introduction. So today, we'd like to talk about demystifying your ISMS and your security model. And my name is Quan Heng. So I know John practiced a lot, he's been trying, but everyone butchers my name. So it's Quan Heng from Privasec. So the first question that we always get whenever we walk in an organization is, what is a working security model? So across different organizations and businesses, we see many different approaches to security. Now, the thing we need to get good at, of course, the very first thing as cybersecurity professionals is to be able to justify security, to be able to explain the difference between the feeling of security and the reality of security, and how not to ignore any probable risks, and to introduce the idea that security is here to empower the business. So there's actually a great TED talk held at Pennsylvania University called The Security Mirage by Bruce in around 2011 that explains this really well. But I won't go deep into that topic today. So after we are able to explain the need for security, the next step is to be able to create a working security model, to identify what gaps there are, to hit the required security posture, to create a framework to govern the entire system, and to manage this in a repeatable cycle. So usually what we refer to this is as the plan, do, check, act cycle. So there are some organizations with lower level of security maturity who manage to handle these things really well with just a control-centric approach. So what we usually see is people come up with a checklist of minimum requirements that they say, these are the things we're going to go through this year. But they're all around controls. Now, an example of this that I like to talk about is there's this organization in Malaysia that we spoke to, and what they told us was they had already spent a lot of money on their firewall, so they don't need any other security help. We did a quick investigation and we found that they were running IP cameras with default logins within their office, and they were publicly exposed. So obviously there are some gaps with this approach. And as most organizations grow their cybersecurity capabilities, they come out with questions. They come to us with questions around the popular frameworks and certifications out there, around things like NIST, things like SOC 2 Type 2, ISO 27001. And the question always is, where do I start? Because there's so many options out there. And there's a lot of misunderstanding also with the different approaches and the purposes of each of these frameworks and certifications. So from our perspective, typically we look at this entire growth process as a three-stage ladder. Organizations start off with no security, and then they move towards a maturity and control-centric approach, and then towards a risk-based approach. And that transition between a maturity to risk-based approach is where ISMS plays a key role in the security model, pairing a working management system with a set of controls that apply particularly well to the organization or make sense for the organization. Now, in addition to this, right, for organizations that need to communicate cybersecurity assurance globally, ISO is actually one of the most common that we see. So 27001 provides requirements for Information Security Management System, or ISMS. Now, through these conversations, we have found that many misconceptions around what an information security management system is supposed to achieve and where it fits in your organization's cybersecurity capability. So for example, a very common thing we hear is frustrations around organizations who use ISO 27001 as a control standard rather than governance one. And they find that they can't exactly meet what the document requires or what the certification requires. So now on to the topic of the day. about the 10 misconceptions about 27001. So we run through the most common issues we see with the misunderstanding about what the standard is supposed to communicate and what's trying to enforce, and debunk them one by one. So the ISO 27001 is a standard for implanting a system to manage information security. Another popular publication is 27002, which we also hear very often, which is a separate document meant to provide guidelines for best practice security controls. So the talk today is about 27001 and not about 02. Now 27001 is the one that companies certify to. 02 acts as a guideline for controls and not around the management system. So as a brief overview, 27001 contains about 10 clauses, about 144 security controls such as how do you implement strong passwords, around access controls, around encryption, and so on. And also the clauses are instructions to implement a management system to manage security using a risk-based approach. And controls are the security mechanisms which you use and put in place to manage risk or to mitigate risk. So the standard contains a list of common people, process, and technology controls. And lastly, just to make the distinction, the clauses are what you get audited against predominantly, not the controls. So is everyone clear on these 4 words, or are there any questions to this point? So the very first thing we'd like to talk about is how people perceive getting the 27001 certification means that they're secure, that they're safe, right? So this standard is titled Information Security Management System. It's about creating a system to manage information security rather than the controls you use for that. So it's not about strong passwords, it's not about encryptions. A common analogy that we like to use is that being 27001 certified does not mean you have a good car. It means you have a good mechanic to fix your car. You have a good system to govern your security posture, and it's a governance tool. At the end of the day, it's still up to the business to use that tool to manage risk and either maintain or grow your security posture, depending on how much money you're willing to spend and depending on your business risk appetite. So it's a balance there. Now, the risk appetite is how much risk you're willing to take, and it really depends on the business and what you're trying to protect. So it's not the same for everyone. And again, being certified does not mean that you're secure. It means you have a working system to manage your security risk and posture. So I think this is the most common misunderstanding that we usually have. For example, if you have a family and you often drive your kids in a car, and if you get a call from your mechanic, your tires are wearing thin, you definitely want to change them because the risk that you face is a bit higher, right? Now I'm lucky in the sense that I don't have kids yet, so it means that I can use my tires until it's no longer legal, and then I will spend the money to change them. Okay, and the second misunderstanding we often see is that ISMS is just a set of policies, a bunch of documents you put on a shelf, and you dust off once a year when you know the auditor is coming to take a look and refresh yourself. So this stems from a very old interpretation and implementation of the standard we used to see in the early 2000s. Now, it is best practice to have a set of short, easily consumable policies, but 27001 is not about writing more policies. And I quote from the standard, only what is necessary for the effectiveness of the information security management system. So it's not about creating more paperwork. It's not about creating more documents. Now, when we develop ISMS systems for clients seeking certification in 27001, we usually create only 5 documents. And out of these five, right, 2 are not actually required. But based on our opinion, doing this for many clients, they are best practices to help you manage the certification. And in addition to this, these days, a lot of these documents are in tools like SharePoint, Confluence, or Google Drive. So it makes them a lot easier to manage and share, and you can edit them simultaneously. Now, the days of death by policies are long gone. So there are still auditors out there who try to reinforce the older approach, but most of them are retired by now, fortunately. And a lot of what you see are auditors looking for intent and evidence of effective security governance, rather than trying to take one box off after the other without making sense of the intention of it. And whenever we stumble upon them, we do try to manage them. And of course, the next question we often get is ISMS actually useful for us? And ISMS is actually pointless, or from their perspective, it's actually pointless. So we often hear this from the hardcore techies. Usually people who say this are those who think that 27001 is there to bury them under processes, unnecessary processes, or those who expect ISO to make their password stronger. So looking at it from a controls perspective. Now then again, 27001 is meant to be a governance framework, not about stronger passwords or firewalls. So as the years pass, we hear less and less of this because security is slowly being perceived as a business issue and a need of the business, not IT. So along with that, it goes away from the association of being strictly controls based to manage security to a more holistic approach. Now, to put it bluntly, ISO is what brings all your security investments together and makes the link between IT security and the business. So it's a governance tool. Now, we used to have this saying, or used to hear it very often, right? That a fool with a tool is still a fool. So ISO gives you a tool. It's a governance tool. It's then up to the business and executives to secure the business. And its particular usefulness comes from its ability to help you invest better and govern your security investments, to know where to focus your efforts on, rather than basing it all on a checklist that never changes, and to evolve together with your business. And next, of course, we have touched on this point already, but the next misconception is that ISO 27001 is a set of IT controls. So the standard is called the Information Security Management System. And as the title suggests, it's about a management system. It's about helping you build a risk-based governance system. Now, it's true that 27001 does contains in its annex, Annex A, and not in the standard itself, about 144 security controls. So these are the things around your firewalls, around your passwords, access controls, and so on. But these are only in the annex, and the standard does not tell you what controls you need to implement and how you, and whether or not you should do those. Now, when people think about 27001, they think about using stronger passwords, writing down policies, or upgrading firewalls. These are all controls you can use to mitigate your risk. However, the standard is not meant to prescribe these controls, and ultimately it's up to you to decide which you use according to the risk you face and according to the business you have. Now on to the fifth misconception. You're halfway through. In the industry, security folks often treat standards like football teams, pledging allegiance to one or the other. So if you ask for an opinion, someone might say NIST is a very good standard and I'm going to go with that. Others might say I'll go with 27001, and others would say SOC 2 would provide the best perspective or the best approach. Now again, 27001 is a governance framework to manage risk. NIST and many other standards are control based. So they are a list of best proactive controls. So there's nothing stopping you from using these controls to mitigate your risk with your ISMS. So we help clients implement ISMSs using and managing NIST and PCI based controls every day, along with other standards and other references. So it wouldn't make sense to maintain these standards in isolation, because at the end of the day, you need a bit of both. You need the management system and you need a set of working controls that make sense for you for security to be put in place. So if people tell you that we are a NIST shop or we don't do ISO, there's probably a misunderstanding there. So if you do hear that, divert them to Privasec, give them my email address. We're more than happy to run them through the difference between governance and control frameworks and get a bit richer along the way. So the next misunderstanding, or the next misconception, is that ISO dictates a minimum security level. So ISO is not here to tell you what level of security you should have. It's only here to help you identify security risks, and then you decide how you want to mitigate them based on the security that you as a business wants to achieve. Now, arguably, this also means you can get certified with below average security controls as long as you as a business are aware of these risks and you say, I'm willing to accept them, perhaps because the cost of fixing them is higher than the impact of the risks. Of course, the standard is very flexible and non-prescriptive, and it's made that way to be adaptable to all businesses, small and large, across all industries. And the downside of all these flexibilities, what we just described, it gives you a lot of opportunities to shoot yourself in the foot, and expected that at the end of the day, your actions must be aligned with your business decisions. And as long as you treat the entire cybersecurity function as a business, towards a business objective, or drive it towards a business objective, you will not go wrong there. The next misconception is that ISMS is a long journey. This is what we hear by far as one of the greatest blockers to someone adopting ISMS, adopting 27001 as a certification. So some people think it might take 1 year, 2 years, or even maybe 3 years to achieve certification. But in reality, it takes about 5 to 9 months to implement. It might take a little longer if you do it internally or with contractors. But usually the moment someone engages us to the moment the certificate lands on their desks, it takes about 5 to 9 months. And the impact on the staff, on average, is about 40 to 80 hours combined. That's the combined time commitment we need from your stakeholders to get something set up, to get a working security management system. Now that said, the certification and having a working ISMS is not the crowning of a security maturity journey. It's not something you go out to do after you have fixed all your security problems, after you have dealt with all your risks. It's something you do closer to the beginning of your journey. It's something to help you fix and mature your cybersecurity function. So remember, 27001 and ISMS is a tool. You don't go out and buy your tools after you have done with your work. You buy your tools and you set everything up early on before you get about doing anything else. So in 5 to 6 months, you could be certified, and sometimes faster. Another misconception is ISO audits are hard to pass. So believe it or not, some people go all the way to build a working ISMS and never actually certify it. It's mostly because people are afraid of the audit, or they think they're saving their company money by not certifying. Now we are in an environment where security to the average folk is something that's vague and it's hard to understand, it's hard to represent. And people fall back on certifications like 27001, they fall back to SOC 2 Type 2 attestations to recognize the level of security, or use it as a benchmark or reference for that. So certificates actually make people happy. Certificates helps with building trust. And the increase in revenue we see usually far outweighs the cost of certification, which is actually quite reasonable in most cases. So in many markets or high value tenders, you simply cannot play if not certified, because they're looking for that representation of security. And if they don't see it, it's just hard to get your foot through the door. Now, auditors are looking for compliance rather than non-compliance. So their job is also to help you maintain an effective governance system. It's not to try to make you fail. And the other thing we often hear, of course, is ISMS is a luxury I cannot afford. Now, this statement can come either from the business as a whole or from the IT department who's charged with ensuring security is maintained. But in a way, there's some misunderstanding here. They would say that, hey, we are replacing our firewall, so we are not able to afford ISMS anytime soon, and it's a luxury for them. But it's the opposite. So if you like the funding, the first thing you should do actually is to get ISMS or get a working ISMS system in place, get the certification. As I said earlier, certifications makes people happy. So people don't get sad if they're certified. If you send an email to an organization and say, now we are ISMS, we are ISO 27001 certified, no one will be crying in reaction to that. So think of certificates as a business commodity. Even if you're in IT or you don't have money or the budget for it, you can sell the certificate easily to the executives if you're coming from the perspective of this certificate presents a benchmark or reference to how we maintain our security standards or how we manage our security. So you increase your sales with this shiny and trendy certificate to put on your front door. Now the beauty of this all is that once you're certified, this certificate guarantees regular funding to mitigate your risk if you're doing everything right. So in short, this is a way to ensure management commitment and guarantee funding in the long term. Because if you're able to identify risks, if you're able to justify the need for security well and manage it well, manage your program well, there is justification for the funding to be put in place and the commitment to ensure that you are following what ISMS is supposed to be. Now, these days, a lot of information security, most organizations are owned by business, not just IT. So it's usually the business that pays for the certification, not the IT department. These days, most of what we do and what we see, it comes from the business. So with regards to how much getting certified will cost you, or if you outsource ISMS, including the final certification audit, you're probably looking at something under 120,000. So this is the cost of a fully outsourced and certified ISMS with training and knowledge sharing to ensure that internal capability is built and you can maintain it on your own. Now, some people choose to do it internally to keep the cost down. This also works, and ourselves, along with other consulting firms out there, are more than happy to assist if you go down that path. But usually it does take a bit more time, and you might find that it is a bit more expensive rather than outsourcing because of the additional effort required. But to sum it all up, do not mistake the cost of implementing your security controls with the cost of a certified ISMS. So ISMS costs typically a lot less than the controls themselves. And the controls would depend a lot on the organization you are, the size, what size you are at, what kind of IT infrastructure and exposure you have, as well as what type of business you are. And the last misconception here is that certification bodies can build my ISMS. So certification bodies must remain independent, and for that reason, they will not help you design and implement an ISMS. It's unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on perspective, consulting firms like us that do that. So we have consultants that specialize with ISMS who are either registered auditors or lead auditors with a real wealth of experience, seeing that we need to start ISMS projects every month across all industries and companies of all sizes. So to sum it all up, right, what are next steps from this? Now, if you want that working information security model or security model, you need a working set of security controls as well as a management system around it for governance. So you need to build, certify, and improve that. I've put in a summary page here so that everyone can take a look at the truths that we've gone through today. You can take a screenshot of this. You can use this as a reference, as a takeaway slide. But we are running a bit short on time right now, so we'll just move to the Q&A section if anyone has any questions. If not, we'll hand it off to the next speaker.
Hugh, I don't think you've left yourself enough time for questions. Did you do it on purpose? It's too much to cover.
Yes.
If anybody has any questions, I'm sure we can get them across the queue, and I know there will be some that come up, but I want to thank you very much. It was very extensive, and we might go straight to the next speaker if you can, just because we are running short on time.